We live in a world where tons of people lie. They lie all the time. That makes the truth rare, and rare things are valuable. There's a book I like, I've mentioned it before, it's called Wonderworks by Angus Fletcher, and he talks about how various inventions or tools in literature affect us psychologically, emotionally. Chapter 2 of Wonderworks is called Rekindle the Romance, Sappho's Lyrics, the Odes of Eastern Zhao, and the invention of the secret discloser. So Angus Fletcher talks about the invention in literature of the poetic voice of I. This invention, it involved two things. Number one, self-disclosure. You share details about you, particularly hidden things about you, stuff you wouldn't ordinarily confess, things that that make you feel awkward, goofy, embarrassed, treasured memories, private hopes, fears, mistakes. So you reveal that, and then two, you combine that self-disclosure with wonder, with a feeling of awe or specialness. You make it poetic. You don't just tell someone you have a crush on them, you tell them that your love is like the moon or whatever. Without that poetic element, self-disclosure can end up being less enticing and more off-putting. It can fill us with these unwanted personal details about the person that makes us uncomfortable. Like, this is weird. Where's this coming from? Why are you sharing this with me? Right? If someone tells you something overly personal and you don't feel close to them, you might get anxious. Epinephrine fires up inside you. You feel like running away. I got to get out of here. This is too intimate. I don't want to be in this situation. However, if along with your anxiety-inducing self-disclosure to whatever person or audience, you can mix in some poetic language that primes the dopamine circuits of the person you're confessing to, now you've sweetened up that anxious state. All of a sudden, they're associating those anxious butterflies with something that's kind of nice, even pleasant. And if it's pleasant enough, then the person being wooed by this self-disclosing poetry might even self-disclose back. They might admit that they have feelings that they were hiding. They might become comfortable enough to be vulnerable and even share something back with you, the illustrious poet. Now the two of you are feeling even closer together. Dopamine kicks up a little higher. Now it's not just one person dumping their feelings on you, you get to dump your feelings back. So intimate secrets can feel like powerful sources of, love vibes, right? And maybe it's not love, maybe it's more infatuation, and maybe it's ultimately egotistical. We just like the self-gratifying hit of being able to self-disclose. I like myself, I feel better about myself when I'm, with you, that sort of codependency thing. Why am I talking about how romantic poetry functions in relation to comedy and lying? How is all of this related? Much of comedy these days functions in a similar way. Comics, we go up on stage and we share thoughts that aren't exactly normal. Actually, they may be perfectly normal thoughts, but they aren't thoughts you would normally express in public, right? They're not typically outside thoughts. They're more inside, under the cover of night, a few beers deep, maybe some drugs floating around kind of thoughts. That's usually what you're talking about at comedy shows. So can self-disclosure be intimate when the secrets are being shouted into a microphone to a crowd instead of whispered into the ear of a potential lover? Gross. So yeah, the comic, you self-disclose, and then instead of poetry, you encapsulate the disclosure in a joke. And the joke, if it works, makes the audience laugh. That excites dopamine, you build tension in the room, and then you pop the bubble, right? Epinephrine, dopamine. Epinephrine, dopamine. You're giving your thoughts. The audience is self-disclosing back in a way when they laugh, right? It's a spontaneous self-disclosure. It's not articulated, but they won't laugh if what you're saying isn't resonating with them emotionally. It is a form of reciprocation, telling a joke, getting a laugh back. But how do you move beyond infatuation? Is there a deeper place you can go with the art form of stand-up? Because romantic poetry doesn't tell the whole story of love, right? That's not love, it's infatuation, romance. It inspires wonder and awe, these big feelings, but those big feelings don't reflect everyday reality. They don't reflect real love, the mundane, dutiful aspects of love, the simpler side of it. That doesn't show up in, romantic poetry. At least not typical romantic poetry. Maybe there's, I don't read enough romantic poetry. I'm sure there's some poems out there that aren't just fluffy, things that, teenagers read. I'm sure there's stuff out there that's not overly silly stuff that's written by teenagers. But the point is, to me, the best art, I think, has to reflect reality. It has to capture as much as it can. It shouldn't leave things out. It's always a distortion of reality. But even when you're distorting it, if you're careful, you can still reflect back something authentic. You can still tell the truth through the distorted lens. That's the thing. The essential thing is to not lie. You don't want to write poetry that sounds beautiful but isn't true. That's kind of worthless because it's misleading. You hear people talk about how Disney movies messed them up as kids, like distorted our ideas of how life works with these fairy tales. Side note, Angus Fletcher, Wonderworks, actually talks about the fairy tale twist as a literary invention in chapter 7 of his book. So if you want to, you can check that out. Fairy tales, like Disney stuff, it can induce positive feelings, but that needs to be balanced out. Life isn't all roses and butterflies. I have a Google Doc full of comedy advice to myself that I read from time to time. And one of the notes that's very prominent in that document is tell the truth, do not lie with your art. I watched this documentary about Patrice O'Neal, a very funny comedian, hilarious man, very committed to being exactly who he was on stage. The documentary is called Killing is Easy, and he says something along the lines of, once you understand comedy, killing is easy. But can you do it without lying? That's a much higher bar. You're not just doing a party trick at that point. You have to also say something real. The self-disclosure has to be authentic. What's the emotional truth in the joke you're telling? Are you willing to share that, or are you just hiding behind a bunch of words arranged in the right order and said with the appropriate, well-timed inflection? You can pull laughs out of the audience with the party trick once you know the mechanics, but there's a place you can go beyond that, as an artist, if you're willing to. And to me, that's ultimately more respectful of the audience, to be your real self. It takes more confidence. You're going to fail more. Some people are not going to like you at all. They might even hate your freaking guts. But it's more useful for everyone. It's more valuable for everyone involved. It's going to result in art that more accurately reflects reality instead of a heightened, candied over, glossy version of it. Which, maybe can make someone feel good for a short period of time, but it's not that useful long term. If you're making art the right way, it's not going to be a lie. It's not going to be a lie. I heard a funny saying once, if they crucified Jesus Christ, there's going to be some people who don't like you. Whether you're religious or not, that's kind of hilarious. Yeah, if people didn't like the literary archetype of perfection that was the biblical Jesus, yeah, some people aren't going to appreciate the authentic you. Whatever dumb crap you decide to do with your life. So just accept that. Tell the truth, tell your truth. Let people who like you, and haters gonna hate. That's all perfectly fine. It's actually good. It's healthy.